Time for some hair. This is first pass of the hair. This is mainly to get the volume in. Ideally, you'd probably want to do this earlier in your sculpt, but I think I was just too obsessed with with getting the features. But depending on what kind, because I wasn't really quite decided all the way through if I wanted it to have hair or not. But luckily I decided that she should have. It's a big part of again the female look. Yeah. Of course, you can have women who are or have like a buzz cut or bald, but in general they have hair.
You want to do something more feminine.
Yeah, exactly, and that just helps. You can have more masculine features that way, and then hide it a little bit with more feminine hair. One thing that's important to keep in mind with this is that how your hair looks, or like how your hairline is actually very distinct from men to women. Men's hairline usually doesn't extend this far ahead. You look at the ear and in front of the ear there. Usually that's a very like feminine thing to have it protrude that far. So definitely look at different references when you're looking for hair, because it's not all the same. You can't use a man's hairline, even if it's not like a receding hairline. You can't use that as a reference for how you want to sculpt a woman's hair. And this being first pass, it's just meant to just have the shape and the volume with a little bit of detail of how I kind of want the hair to look like. I didn't want to go into free-flowing hair, because that would be an entire tutorial on its own. So this is purely about getting some shape in there with, it's just hair that's pulled back and put in a bun. That's it.
We have a tutorial on how to sculpt more free-flowing hair on our YouTube channel. It's ancient. It's called How to Sculpt Hair. It's been years old now, but it should still be valid.
Yeah. If we did our job right.
Yeah. I think hair is so important on a character. And yeah, I often put this in fairly early on, just because it's such an important part of the silhouette and just the overall feel of it.
Yeah.
I personally sculpt that as a separate subtool, but that has advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
One disadvantage is that when it comes to hair, a big problem with CG hair is that the transition from no hair to hair is very sharp in CG. Well, in reality, it's sure, you can definitely see a hairline and see where it starts and begins, but in reality, it's often way more subtle. There is a gradient from no hair to hair, and that's nicer with this method.
And I feel like, so this again might just be one of my bullshit facts, but I feel like that hairline with the tiny little fuzzy hair, like there are more fuzzy hair on women. Like it's I feel like this. It fades more for women, but the hairline can be more defined for men.
I haven't thought about that. That's actually an interesting observation.
Maybe make the observation and then tell me that I'm totally wrong. I'm open to that.
But regardless of that proximate knowledge being true or not, it's still important that you do have this like fuzzy line between of really, really thin hairs where the hairline is.
That's why I opted for keeping it part of the same sculpt, purely because it's easier to make it flow and look more organic if it's connected to your head, basically.
Yeah. This is also where the standard brush is fantastic.
Yep.
I do the same method here where, you block it out with the clay brushes and then you just add some definition with the standard brush.
Yeah, usually my clay buildup is for volume and some indication of how do I want the hair to flow. And then the standard brush is brought in to define that flow a little more, define individual strands, kind of like here. And already I've gone away from symmetry. Like some parts will still be symmetrical, but I'm trying to be not symmetrical in the center because it's such an obvious part that's symmetrical.
Yeah, stuff looks even more symmetrical when you have something which is organic, which is now symmetrical. If you have something mechanical and it's perfectly symmetrical, you're like, that's the way it's supposed to be. But if you have something like a human or hair, can you think of anything more organic than hair? It's like you move it around, there's some wind out, you put your hair through, your hands through it. Suddenly it's just far more organic.
Yeah. And for the bun here, honestly, that's my approach to it. I just like, I'm going to have a few more strokes where it's like, burp, 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 burp. But there's less structure in the bun than there is in the rest of the hair. All of the hair sort of like, it flows towards the bun. That's usually how it goes when it's pulled back like this.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see that from the flow of the hair.
One thing I think is important, and this is the same when it comes to drawing as well. If you're doing hair, you don't draw every single strand.
No.
Like, that would be insane. And first of all, it would just take way too much time. But more importantly, it would just look like noise. Because that would be like sculpting every single pore.
Yeah.
You know, you're indicating some things here. You're indicating some weight of the hairs and weight of the skin. You're not actually going for true realism with this. You're going for you're going for something more appealing, something a bit more stylized. Because if you did every single strand of hair right now, that would be by far the most detailed part of the entire sculpture.
Yeah, and then it would look out of touch with the rest of the face.
Yeah.
Because there aren't going to be that many details on there. One technique that I use when sculpting hair like this is also just going from a bigger brush to a smaller brush. So I'll try to get, let's say I start with brush size 50, so I'll do everything 50, then I'll go to 25, and then I'll go 12.5, and then I'll go smaller and smaller until I reach the smallest one that I like, and then that's sort of like, that's the end part of the detail.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever it is you're sculpting, there is some fundamentals behind it, which is, from general to specific.
Yeah.
So first, you're doing what we did here, which is the overall direction of the hair, the overall shape of it. Does it go into a bun, and then you have the main follicles, and then you're just going into smaller and smaller. Where at the end, you would see individual strands.
Yeah. But those would be incredibly time-consuming to sculpt.
And do them more as hints.
Yeah.
Something for your brain to pick up that, this reads as hair.
One thing that's a sort of like a good technique when you're sculpting hair is to alternate between additive and subtractive in your standard brush. So maybe you can do a stroke that digs into the model, and then you can do a few around it that protrudes out of the model. It's just a good way to create some volume in there. So it's not all just like a lumpy thing that just goes out, out, out.
One thing to keep in mind as well is how much volume the hair actually adds to the head. It's not just, if you obviously have a super clear buzz cut, you're talking about like 2 millimeters or whatnot. But with something like this, if you have long hair like this yourself, or touch somebody with long hair, like you can fit a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Like a whole cake.
Cake. Muffin.
A whole muffin. At least one muffin.
One thing I'm trying to keep in mind here is also going forward what's going to happen to the hair. So we have a final hair chapter in the end of the series where we actually go in and do some actual geometry for the hair. So I'm trying to cut in some grooves where I know I can fit in some hair along those grooves. But seeing as that geometry won't be connected to the mesh here, I'm trying to make it so that the hair can sort of dig in and out of those small little channels that I'm carving in now. And again, for this part, I use reference. I find reference of how what does a hair bun look like, and where some different kinds of hairlines on different kinds of women to see just like what kind of individual variation is there. And then I just try to make sort of like either an average of that or find a particular hairstyle that I like.
Yeah, it would be so dumb to spend all this time to make this beautiful sculpture with tons of reference and then just wing the hair.
Yeah.
That would be like having a gorgeous woman with a shitty haircut.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can never use enough reference, honestly. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get everything from. Everything comes from your reference.
And if you don't want to look at all the reference, just don't. But it's just more data. Yeah, I'd rather have too much data than not enough data.
Yeah, because at least then you can start to filter stuff out. One thing is if you don't have all the answers, then you just have to start making things up, but that's what reference can give you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one thing I've really learned when it comes to CG is stop assuming you know what things look like.
Yeah.
The moment you're actually assuming that you know what anything looks like, then you're a bit in trouble. We talked about this in our observation video, that you've seen a tree so many times. Of course, you know what a tree looks like. You really don't. You might be able to make something generic which reads as a tree. Same here. You could totally sculpt hair without reference, and it would read as hair.
Yeah.
it just wouldn't. I mean, you could sculpt a human and it would read as a human, but it's not about just making it read as a human or read as a tree or a bun or whatever. It's about making it look interesting and appealing.
Making a good human.
Yeah.
It's easy to make a bad human.
Yeah.
Even for someone inexperienced, because that's mostly what you know.
Yeah. But the moment, yeah, because you might assume you know what a person looks like because you keep seeing people all the time, and hopefully you are indeed a person yourself. Same with hair as well. You looked at it so many times. I really find that's where I'm screwing up.
Yeah.
I can do a lot of complex stuff really well because I never underestimate it. I always know it's so complicated. So therefore you just take the necessary precautions for it.
Yeah.
But where I start to stumble is with the simple stuff.
The volume of hair that sits on top of the head can be quite heavy. There can be quite a lot of it. And the same thing to the side. So I'm trying to make like this split so I can sort of like, I can add some weight to the hair. So it feels like there's a good clump of hair in there. So it doesn't just follow the skull, but it actually starts to diverge from the shape of the skull a little bit. Just so you're aware that, okay, this is actually a volume of hair. Otherwise, it would be pulled back completely and like completely tight to the skull.
It's interesting, right? Looking at something like hair, because one strand of hair, it weighs nothing. Like you literally can't feel it. But if you were to have a whole wig or something, you can definitely feel this weight to that. So by itself, like 2 strands of hair, if somebody's balding and you have like 2 really, really long strands of hair, you wouldn't feel that at all. But if you have a whole set of full hair like this, this would totally behave based on gravity.
Gravity's pretty good.
Gravity's
at
pretty
that.
good.
But yeah, this is just, like I said, first pass on the hair. It's just to get that volume in there, ideally. You'll do this sooner, and I definitely should have. But for me, I just got a little distracted, especially with the mouth. But it's an important volume to get in there, and it's important to at least keep it in mind whether you are making hair or you decide to not include it for your model.